Good afternoon. This is the afternoon edition of the House Government Operations and Military Affairs Committee on Friday, February 3rd. And we are here for a committee discussion to wrap up our work this week. Wanted to open up an opportunity for the committee to reflect on the testimony we've heard on H-127, which is the sports wagering legislation. So start our week off with the draft language and heard some pretty extensive testimony from a number of experts on problem gambling yesterday. So I took copious notes and had a number of things on my list of potential suggestions, but I thought maybe I'd start with our Vice Chair, Representative Byron, if you had a couple of things that you might want to float out there. I think I'm trying to create, my goal would be to organize our work moving forward on this bill to sort of put things into two buckets. One is, are there general things that there's a thumbs up around the room that we want to go ahead and change on the draft bill? That would be one column of things we might want to resolve if there are things that are obvious that we want to change, we have consensus on. And then the other would be, what are some areas where we really need to dig in, take some more testimony and do some work? So those are my two asks of you to think about today. And if you think of something at 2 a.m., call you. Send us an email. Yeah, call me. Call Matt.
2 a.m.
I'll probably be up.
Yeah.
So Representative Byron, do you want to start the conversation?
Sure, thank you. Yeah. So at this stage of this conversation, I think you've heard a good slug of testimony on the prevention, treatment, recovery side, and a lot of those guardrails, what we have currently in the bill, we heard testimony from the industry folks that the study committee's recommendations that were applied to the bill did what seems from their perspective a solid job framing it out. But we're here to make it better. So obviously we all found it agreeable right out of the gate that we should go from 18 to 21. That's a conversation I wanted to just kind of nail down with folks today.
Yeah. So maybe we should just pause there and say, it seemed that way to me too. That was my impression, but I just want to really make sure with the committee, we heard that in some testimony yesterday. I know that's been a conversation some of us have had in the hallway, but just around the table, are folks feeling good that our next draft of this bill, we probably should just go ahead and say we're moving that minimum age from 18 to 21?
100%. Yeah.
Can we tie that to the voting age as well?
I wondered that's what I could see your will.
Or just the lottery in general. Because it's 18 for a scratcher.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah, that's going to get confusing, unfortunately, because 18 for scratch tickets, but 21 for this. I mean, I totally support the higher age, but any 18-year-old can go in and buy a bunch of scratch tickets, right?
Yeah, so this is why I wanted to have this conversation. So Representative Morgan and then Representative.
And the one I always fall back is my old profession. At 18, you can go in the military and get yourself killed. So why can't you? I mean, I'm just throwing that out. You know what I mean? I'm not advocating for it, just throwing it out there.
We just, it's always that conversation whenever we talk about.
I don't mean to be that blunt, but I mean, literally you can.
No, I totally agree with you. Yeah, I think it's a worthy aspect of the discussion.
Yeah, just throwing it out there.
Representative Chase and then Representative Hooper.
So what I'm hearing is the military, it should be 21.
There are a lot of thoughts I can go with.
Try to stay focused, even though some of these things are they're philosophically interrelated. I want to try to stay focused on H-127.
Enforcement, like if we're talking about websites and digital devices and stuff, parents giving their kids their laptop, is that a topic that we want to address, or is it explicitly okay? Is it implicitly okay? Do we want to talk about any guardrails or anything?
So if I tease out what I've heard in testimony and what I've learned from the study committee's work, the identity verification on many of the operators' platforms is really tied to the individual person. So you cannot place a bet on their platforms unless there's the facial recognition on a smartphone, for instance, or some other way to verify that that person is the individual that the platform has as a registered participant. So
I mean,
you need to take some more testimony on exactly how that works, I think, is what you're flagging.
Yeah, can I ask a clarifying?
Yeah, I want to, there's a lot of hands up, so I want to make sure.
Yeah, because I'm confused on if, once you're logged in, there's actually only face verification that it's doing, and then you're logged in and you're good to go and do anything, or like, is it physically when you're placing the bet that it's then doing the face ID?
So there's differences on different platforms.
Okay.
This is an area we need to take more testimony.
And we're gonna bring the respective operators in to discuss the interfaces on their.
That'd be huge.
Platforms. Yes, no, that's in the pipeline.
That's huge.
Does that, okay, so we're putting operator interfaces and identification.
Because then if it just keeps you logged in, a child takes their parent's phone and is placing $1,000 bets.
Or an older sibling
Yeah.
logs in, hands the thing,
There you go.
or an older friend.
Yeah.
So Representative Waters Evans, then I'll move to this side of the table.
I was just to go back to what we were discussing before about 18 versus 21. I think there's substantial research that shows that teenagers, in particular, boys, have a frontal lobe development, which is decision-making, impulse control. It's not fully developed until they're in their mid-20s. So it seems, and also I believe someone said the other day, when we were, I don't remember who it was, but they said that it's the population who's using these are like the younger men. It's like educated, affluent, white, young men who apparently also have no impulse control. So I feel like that's a really good case for 21, is like, you know what I mean? It's just, if there are people who have the means but not the brain control, I feel like.
Yeah, and so the study committee stayed neutral on this because a lot of the other stakeholders outside the four legislators were like tax, AG's office, blah, blah, blah. And so they weren't really their charge in participation with the study didn't really hit on that aspect. So that's one of the reasons the study committee stayed neutral on the age.
Yeah.
And so we decided to make it more of a policy decision, which is why I wanted to do this here. And those were all the points that I agreed with. So with what you're saying as far as.
That's all I have to say.
Representative Hooper.
I would agree that 21 is the minimum. However, that's not why I put my hand up. When initial testimony came across that in the committee, not ours, the prior study committee, that we hit the ground running with nobody having an objection to bringing this to the state at all, and we went forward from there. It seems like we're doing the same thing here. I don't know that we have actually decided formally that we're going to advance this, other than just a string of conversation heading in that direction. I find myself in a classic, don't ask the question you don't know the answer to, because when I put it out to my constituents, I'm getting a 6-to-1 ratio of no way. Hell no.
Wow.
Something along that. And some of the thread is, why should we start doing something that is going to cost us more money to deal with in the future? So I don't know if it's a public hearing or what it might be, but I definitely feel like my constituents are not on board with this and are actively not going to be.
I have had the exact opposite experience.
Me too. Yeah.
I have gotten more correspondence of people wanting us to make this legal so that they don't have to go out of state to bet. And so that's
a question of process, I think, because I sent it out on Front Porch Forum and everybody got it, as opposed to me waiting for somebody to tell me
To
what
come
they
in.
want.
Yeah.
So I raised the issue for somebody to respond to, and that's a critical difference, I think, when you do this. I've done it both ways before, and this one just happened to be much stronger than I thought.
Wow. Yes.
Interesting.
And I, realize that the sophistication of the voters in Burlington might be a little.
Well played, Representative Hooper.
Focus group at the old North Ender.
Just a really quick comment, prior to taking up these discussions, I had a family discussion where my 21-year-old nephew was present. And he said, stop, this is getting too confusing. I could go in the military and shoot someone. I can now drink. And I can vote, and they're all different ages, and now they're letting 16-year-olds vote some places or talking about it, and now they're talking about gambling being allowed, and he's from out of state too, so this wasn't even a Vermont discussion. And he said, I just wish that there was an age, a uniform age for everything. And then the conversation evolved into cannabis use. And he said, what about the whole theory that your brain doesn't stop developing until you're 26? And why is everything else under 26? So I'm just throwing that out there from a young person's perspective.
Valid.
And it was surprising because I figured a young person would say, hey, yeah, we want it all. But he really
I think
didn't.
we're actually like, what I've seen it with action over age and access to various, firearms, vice, blah, blah, blah. We are actually starting to hit a little bit more continuity, and not totally, but more continuity at 21.
Yes, I agree with
Yeah.
you there.
And
Senator Chase.
to that point, Rep. Hango, one of the things that I've heard is there's different types of decisions, like impulse decisions versus reasoned thought decisions. I feel like the gambling in particular fits into the impulse, whereas some of the other things, if you
Like vote.
ask a kid to map out a logical path for something, a lot of them can figure it out pretty young. I think that's one of the distinctions the psychologists make, and we just need to make sure that lines up with what we're allowing permissions for or what have you.
Good point.
That is true.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think I have really mixed feelings about the different age when something is legal versus the age that people should actually have access to something or be doing them. And there are lots of policy considerations for us on any of these questions. And the one before us with H127, to the earlier conversation about the difference between the other things that the lottery does, like scratch tickets, those things where you go to a retail location and purchase that thing, are a little different just in terms of the level of access to when there's an application on your phone that's with you all the time, that we know has, from the testimony we heard, and I think some of us from seeing people with personal experience, they're designed to compel you to use them more, which is a little different. It's a different experience and it's a different point of sale.
Yeah. And sort of like to add fuel to the mental fire. I always refer back to like crypto trading apps and whatnot, because those are accessing. And you want to talk?
That's crypto's 18.
Yeah. You want to talk about a night at the casino? Crypto starts swing trading coins.
Just if I can help clarify the age possibly, I'm not sure about the military and voting, but like when you with the substance, it's because it triggers the same, like pleasurable, I think it's dopamine, chemical that makes you want to do something. So the reason it's a problem is because the younger you are, it sets up that pathway sooner. And so when you, when you set up that pathway early on, then it triggers a likelihood for compulsion when you're using it, even when you don't want to, and it's causing you problems in your life. So I think it is slightly different than some other age restricted situations, although as a mother, I would make the driving age 25, but I know that's not popular.
That came into it too. The driving age came into that conversation as well. It's all over the map.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I think there's a lot to process around age, but I am hearing generally that we see another draft of this bill, or probably more support than a simple majority here for moving that up to 21. And I seem to recall that almost all of the states that have moved forward with the online mobile sports wagering in any kind of comparable model, that 21 seems to be the standard.
Yep, I'm not aware of any of them that are 18.
Yeah, so that, I mean, that too is another sort of.
What are the ages in Vegas and Jersey City?
Atlantic City?
Or
21.
Yep, sure.
Casino access across the board is 21.
Okay.
Yep,
It is?
as far as I know.
To actually play the games.
Well, I'm sorry, to sit at a table and like functionally gamble, I'm pretty sure it's.
But you can
21
walk
across the
through, you can walk through the
You
room.
can walk through, but to sit at the table and play blackjack.
I thought it was 18. Okay. Good to
I
know.
think they changed, it used to be, and it was changed at one point, probably once you were well past the age of 18.
Representative Ruiz?
Thank you. The 21 age, I would agree with. I mean, the research on the development of the frontal cortex and executive function is actually pretty recent. And that's why 21 has been the age, and we might want to start looking at that at some point in time. And the whole 18 was because of being in the military, and they realized that wasn't a great idea for letting the general population drink. I also think there's a completely different dichotomy there for gender, and I think we could move it up to 46 for males. But I hear from constituents a lot about a lot of things, and I haven't heard one about this yet. And I'm gonna try and pull an online poll together for town meeting and put this question among some others just to get a sense of what they're doing.
I mean, when I first started to learn about this issue, I'll be totally honest, I was like, oh, why would we want to do this? That was my initial reaction to legalizing sports wagering. And then there were stories about the consideration of the bill that led to the study committee. I started to have people in my life say, oh man, I'm already on a bunch of these apps doing this. So my experience of it was having this first reaction of, I don't think this sounds like a great idea, to, oh wow, we need to regulate this because there are so many people who are already doing it. And that's the journey I've been on as a legislator. And now I'm trying to learn a lot more about this as we decide what to do. And given the amount of interest in the public from the department, the work that went into the study committee, I wanted to make sure we really worked on this, but I wasn't ready to poll all of you before we got a bunch more questions answered. So this age issue just being one that seemed like there, as I was looking around the room, a pretty obvious consensus starting to grow. Representative Hooper.
Well, I go back to the lottery, where one individual pretty much put a plug in the dam for a good while, and that was the governor. And it took a long time to get to the point of joining even a small state lottery. And there were a lot of public hearings, I think, legislatively. I was shocked by the amount of response that I got, the strength of the response and the thoughtfulness of the response. So I don't know. My chart seems to be already filled in about where I'm going to go, but I think maybe we do owe the public an opportunity to respond before this hits the floor for a vote.
Yeah, and so I'm interested in understanding on an issue like this, I'm interested in thinking through carefully how we get a public response that's meaningful. And that helps us inform our decision as lawmakers on this, because we have an awful lot of data that's been put in front of us. And there has been an enormous multi-year public debate about this issue. And now it's, with the study commission's recommendations, we've got a thing that could be turned into law and a bill that's pretty well fleshed out, that we can say, okay, there's a bunch of choices here to make. And I'm wanting to make sure that we're being thoughtful about how we put information out into the public, so that when we're getting feedback from our constituents, it's based in fact about what the thing is. Like, what are we talking about when we're talking about sports wagering, and is it online versus retail? And I think even in the few days worth of testimony we've had in here, many of us have learned an awful lot more about what this looks like, and we still haven't even really seen how the platforms work. We've had people talking about them, so I want to take a little bit more testimony before I go down the road of saying, oh yeah, we really want to open ourselves up to a public hearing and hearing just folks from the public testify. But I'm very open to we're having a public meeting right now. We will have many more before this becomes a bill that passes out of this committee. And so I don't know that I'm there yet, but I'm open to create the ideas that folks have from the committee about how we get the feedback we need in order to make.
I was really pretty shocked, and it's out of ignorance, that the guy that showed up in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen was from Caesars, which is, gambling central. Just a comment.
So Representative Higley, and then.
No, so I just quickly Googled any states that allow gambling at the age of 18, and there's 8 of them. And of course, you can go in, there's some specifics, like California does, but mainly on tribal gambling. But the state of Michigan in particular, it's all over the sports betting, casinos, you name it, sounds like it's allowed. So it'd be interesting to go through those and just see why and what particulars there were for the 18-year-olds.
Representative Morgan?
Yes, I like my colleagues to the right, I've had, my representative, like you said, none, interesting, but I have had a little. I've had 3 literally reach out, and it was because of Front Porch Forum. They saw that you had addressed that in your legislative update. One in particular was a medical doctor who wrote quite a lengthy email to me. And I told him in particular, I gave him Andrew's contact, said, hey, if you'd like to testify, reach out and maybe we bring you in some point. He said he had some very specific data that he felt he could share. And I don't know if that meant he was versed in that arena specifically. I think he just maybe had, from his medical background, some thoughts on maybe it was developmental issues. I don't know, but yeah, I guess I'd have to say that it was 2 that were like cautionary comments, like you really want to think that one through, and then the one of this gentleman. So, but not a gob of stuff.
All right, Representative Nugent, and then we'll.
I'm gonna try to explain this. It's sort of hard for me to explain, but what I want to share is that I see this as like, there's buckets of people. So there's like the folks who are using this right now who we want to try to take care of and make sure that they're protected as much as possible. Which makes sense in putting in guardrails if they're already accessing this in some way. And then there's, the untapped customer base that would be, the increased number of people who would be accessing this in addition to that. And I think for me, the challenge is, if this happens, I would, I really appreciate all the discussion, and it's amazing to hear people's thoughtful care about the folks in Vermont. But I think what I'm hearing is that it's measuring the harm that's being done to a certain group of people and then thinking about how that harm might increase to more people. And then the cost of helping all of them together and whether or not it even makes sense from a state standpoint in terms of like dealing with the mental health support and the hotlines and the existing issues. So I'm concerned that if this is put out there as an option, we'll end up doing more harm than good because more people will be using the service than were before.
I think there are a couple of different items that you brought up that I had flagged as areas we need to go deeper on. The one is, what is the marketing and advertising around this, and what limitations do you think are responsible to put on that? I was particularly intrigued by the language from both Ohio and Colorado, and I want to hear from somebody that was involved with the Colorado experience, because if I understood the testimony yesterday, they had to basically go back. They created the market, stood it up, and then said, oh no, we need to rein in the advertising. And I think that goes to some of your point. But the other thing that I think goes to some of what you said, Representative Nugent, was that when we heard from Dr. Klein from the Department of Mental Health yesterday, the amount of resource that is available right now, and also the culture around accessing mental health services for folks who are experiencing the compulsion or problems in their lives related to gambling, pretty limited. We were praised by National Council on Problem Gambling for having a floor in the first draft of the bill on the funding going into that responsible gaming fund. But I think we may want to dig into that language as well and figure out what supports we really need to see. And also another thing that they had flagged in that section of testimony was about having a research, the ability to actually collect and analyze the data. And I don't know if we want to say that we're directing somebody to identify a partner or what that looks like in other states. But we need to, if we do this and we say, we think that we can do more harm reduction by adopting a carefully thought out policy, which I think is what the study committee is telling us their recommendations do, then we need to be able to measure it somehow, right? To know what if we're addressing the concern that Representative Nugent's bringing up.
But just building off that, and we experienced this when we talked about legalizing cannabis, it's very difficult to compile those accurate data sets when you're dealing with a gray and dark market, because people are not honest and forthcoming with what they're actually doing in order for us to compile data. Yeah.
So I had stopped by the Senate Government Operations Committee with my daughter, who's visiting the State House today, and didn't get a chance to see Senator Hardy. So let me say, Molly, you should meet Senator Hardy.
Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
No worries. We're just having a committee discussion about a bill that we've started working on this week. So I think you've captured some of this.
Yes.
And we're going to be hearing from some folks next week. So I want to continue to hear committee conversation, but I'm just making sure that we're thinking about the buckets of things that we would need to address in order to get enough folks on the committee comfortable enough to move a bill forward, or whether, I think we'll hear some more testimony next week and then may park things for a few days and give folks time to talk to constituents, talk to each other, read the copious amount of information that especially Mr. Anderson has offered us from other states. And then maybe we'll pick this up again. But I think we will hear some more and learn some more next week on it. But other thoughts? I know there were a bunch of hands popping up. Representative Waters.
I had a question. I don't recall hearing this, but was there a component of either the study committee or when you were drafting the bill that addressed the racial and social equity piece of this situation? I don't know. I feel like it's something that should be part of every conversation for every bill.
I agree.
It didn't, I don't think the report like really specifically hit on that in depth, but that's something we can certainly get into when we talk to mental health and how they're gonna or would engage, and also what kind of information the operators can give us on their user demographics, right? Yeah.
And I think that it also has reaches into prevention and treatment and all of those things. I think those questions are really important to ask, and I don't think we've talked about it too much. But
as it is in the bill, there's the fund is set up. There's the 2.5% or the $250,000 floor, but there isn't a distinction between money for prevention and money for treatment.
Well, and that's, no, it's not specifically outlined in there because that was one of the things we had to engage more with the Department of Mental Health. And one of the things that we as a study committee didn't want to outline that too specifically because we wanted to allow the committees to do that.
yeah, and I think those equity questions even reach into things like marketing and advertising and stuff like that. It's part of.
And I have notes here too to like really take a look at like what the other states did about, truthful, misleading marketing tactics in some of the other states and see what we can do to like prevent that. That's one of the things we're looking at, being the 35th state to do something. There's a lot of people who skin their knees before us that we can learn from.
Yeah, and truth in advertising pieces, the example language that we saw around prohibitions on false and misleading advertising and what the penalties for those would be. If I wanted to take some more testimony on that.
I have that in my notes. Fines, penalties, and license revocation.
And we heard a specific, it was making me laugh, and I kind of leaned over and looked at Tucker yesterday when Brianne from the council was talking about very clearly like ubiquitous hotline. I had brought up that question about all of the numbers being spat at with all different states with all their different hotlines. But I wonder, is there a specific cost for state participating in like a consolidated national hotline? Or is it the level of service, and does it direct you to the right services and do states opt to have their own resources because they want to have, so I wonder like if we sort of solve my problem, are we creating another one of like having it be some national service that goes nowhere? I don't know. I want to learn more about what it actually is if we adopt some really easily identifiable hotline, if it'll send Vermonters to resources that they can easily access. Representative Fango.
Brianne, it was Brianne, right, who was talking about hotlines, said that national number will direct you to your local services. But I didn't hear anything about a cost associated with that.
Yeah.
So there may be a subscription fee of some kind.
And I had a little bit of a sidebar with Kelly from mental health in the hallway about some of this and honing in some more details of what that function would look like and having that conversation here.
I wonder if there is any data collected about how used and useful those hotlines are. Like what percentage of people who are using those gambling platforms, sports betting apps and platforms are, if it's like 6 people a year, then maybe it doesn't seem like the most effective way. I know little about it, so I'm just gonna make a judgment on it publicly, just for the fun of it. But it seems like there might be other avenues other than a hotline. It seems like a hotline is an easy way to go because it already exists. And we're like, look, we have this number and it's everywhere. And now we're helpful. But if the intent is really to be helpful to people who are struggling or need help with something, I wonder if there are other things other than a hotline. Because who's gonna pick up the phone and call?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things we've discussed with mental health is actually so we have like a hotline that kicks people at Howard Center for lotto issues.
Mm-hmm.
It is very underused.
It is very used? Underused, okay. I was like, what? Okay.
So one of the things we have been discussing it as a study committee, and then I continued this conversation in that hallway chat that I had with Kelly yesterday, was there's the ability to do like more pop-ups and banners within the like app itself while you're on it, and really using this as like an opportunity to update the like function and like accessibility of the existing structure that we have, which is not really, in my mind, doing an appropriate job with the lottery side, and integrating all of these components into like one more modernized
Collective
correct
advice help center.
So it's not just specific to this, it's like all of the like lottery and functions in one more like cohesive.
Somebody mentioned that there was several instances to bet and win or lose within the course of a particular event, and the rapidity and frequency with which people can participate. I'd like to hear from some of the operators if they've got kind of an ingrained system that says, hey, so we noticed you've hit this threshold for 19 out of the past 21 days. Would you like some help?
One of the recommendations that caught my ear and that I made a note about was that I think it might have been the gentleman from the Council on Problem Gaming saying this, but we need to tell the operators, and we could get really specific probably in regulation, not necessarily in this bill, but we could lay out some of the parameters we want in this bill if we move it forward around the cooling off periods and the self-exclusion. So one of the things that he mentioned is you could say to operators, you have to have some kind of a thing where you remind people how long they've been on or a pop-up, right? But if they only do it every 7 hours, I think is what he was saying, then it's not all that useful. So it needs to be a thing where it's like, the regs around this could say, if you're operating on the Vermont system, you got to remind people, how long they've been using this app and, tell them to cool off. My car now reminds me to take a break if I've been driving more than an hour, and it's actually like, it's not a bad thing. Putting the idea in your head that you can pull over and get a cup of coffee, it's like actually really compelling, and it's the thing of like, it's not that any one of these things, a hotline, that it's that what we're hearing from people who've studied the psychology of this stuff is that having the whole package and doing it right works. But if we allow operators to just sort of pay lip service to it or do it in some kind of a token way, that isn't gonna be effective.
Do we need the operators to communicate, like have, there's obviously privacy concerns about sharing data, but like unique user IDs that are, like if we're doing a statewide opt-out program, they've got to have some level of participation. But if somebody's spending 8 hours on one platform versus 2 hours on 4 platforms, do they need to have some sort of tag that follows that?
Representative Hooper.
I think, Representative Byron's comment about a very underused mechanism for people reporting, self-reporting the fact that they're having a lot of fun and they're addicted to something, come help me, is a lesson that we should look at, because it's not really a major component of addiction behavior to want to give it up. And it's very infrequent that somebody says, gee, I just drank a bottle of vodka, I don't want to do that anymore. And this is sort of the same process of more fun, more participation, which is what a couple of people have responded to me when I talk about the big no response. It's that it's a compounding problem, because take your pick of anything, shoplifting to eating Raisinets. If you like it, you do it.
So it's an interesting analogy that you bring up, Representative Hooper, because people who get to a place where they are having their lives negatively impacted by alcohol, some as part of a treatment will take a medication that makes it so that they can't experience the physiological benefit of that, right? And
Yeah,
so,
but take a step back from that. Usually they're doing that because some outside influence has kicked them in the butt and said, you either do this or something else in your life is going to change. And I'm not necessarily seeing that as strong an opportunity when somebody's sitting here playing on their phone.
So it's a pretty strong mechanism if we have a limited number of operators and we adopt a statewide exclusion that makes it so that if you're at that point and you want to self-exclude, and it can universally say to all the legal operators, this person, it isn't placing bets and you cannot allow them to do that. That's a pretty good barrier in a way that doesn't exist in the same way with alcohol, except for the fact that, one of the problems that we're trying to address here is that there's this illicit market that's already there. Whether it's people going across, they're going to other states just across the border, or, using technology to make it look like they're over the border to bet on platforms that are legal in other states, or if they're just going online and, so it's this thing of trying to bring a black market thing into the light. I don't disagree with you that the problems that you're bringing up are all real. I just think prohibition of this particular thing isn't a solution to the harm that is there today. That's why I continue to persist in trying to move this bill to a place where most of us can feel like it's that we're going to do more harm reduction than harm creation, to Representative Nugent's point.
And I mean, the thing that was brought out at the very beginning of this, that one senator said, everybody from my neighborhood is driving over to Vermont to do it. I have not heard that we have any reliable estimate or basis for saying that that's really prevalent in Vermont. And the geofence that we talk about for cutting people off at some point could be used to see how many people are actually going. I mean, your cell phone tells us where you are all the time.
We going to hear from somebody about the geofencing this week?
We were trying to get them scheduled for either Wednesday or Thursday. So that conversation is.
Yeah, but that's the bar, right? I'm looking for something that says, oh my God, look at all these cell phones from Bennington that are.
No. And I believe like they can help with some of that information, because there's different like VPN data, like based on like where the individual's VPN is a resident, what they're doing where, and it bounces around. So that I know that some of the like industry people have that type of data available, because we did see that during the report.
That would be great to hear. Justification for moving one way or the other.
And so like the bulk of the over border play is actually on the New Hampshire side and south of basically like where I am in Virgins, because nobody's taking a ferry across the lake where you are.
Right.
But they're driving over the Champlain Bridge where I am.
Over to Glens Falls area.
Bingo. Yep. And then especially the New Hampshire side, there's a lot of activity going over there.
Representative Nugent,
Just one other thought, if I could add.
please, why we're here.
Thinking about like harm reduction being a huge important aspect of taking care of people's mental health around addictive substances. And then also, and how that applies to people who are already using it. And then there's also the population that's not yet using it that may end up using it because we've created an environment that makes it easier to do that. And I think one analogy that I think helps, or like if you wanted everyone to start eating banana nut muffins, what would you do?
Put banana nut muffins everywhere.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like the cards in Vegas.
Which is one of my favorite muffins, but it's good that they're not everywhere.
This has got me thinking a lot about the snacks that we put on the table
I know.
committee and trying to make sure they're more healthy than that.
What I'm hearing is everybody's still hungry.
I did 2 bites of my salad.
But in all seriousness, Representative Nugent, are there specific things that you would like us to include or exclude, or are areas where we should take some testimony to dig into those questions a little bit more, other than what we talked about today? So, and if you want to think about that a little bit, I've flagged a number of things, and we've invited some folks to speak and follow up on the testimony we heard this week. But I want to dig into this a little bit more next week, and then take a bit of a break from this issue and let it simmer.
Well, awesome. Just to respond to that
Yeah,
question.
please.
I would be curious to know the percentage of profits that are made by these companies and who they're profiting from. If it's the same people over and over again, or if it's scattered and most people are just having fun with it once in a while.
I think that answer depends a lot on the way that the system's set up.
Exactly. It has to do very heavily with how we would structure their taxation, what we allowed for operating cost deductions and things of that nature. So there's a lot of variables in there. Traditionally, bookmaking is not a super high margin endeavor because you're still paying out winners when there are losers. So the net gain on the back end is not as high as a lot of people assume it to be.
I mean, we saw in the joint fiscal office estimates that, if you had the biggest kind of number that the outside projections of $200 million still had, revenues that were in the single or small double digit millions, right? So it's that thing by percentage, it's a really low margin because you have operating costs and then you're paying out the winnings. And so I also just, for the folks listening at home, one of the conversations I've had repeatedly with legislators is like, oh, you guys are looking at this. We're like, how much revenue is there going to be in the sports wagering thing? I'm
I
like,
thought this was so much more.
yeah. And that's just, I think it's analogous to our policy conversations around cannabis where I think it's not a question of it funding major programs of the state of Vermont. Let's just put it that way. That's not really why we're having this conversation.
I see it as just sort of like helping backfill ARPA commitments that we were still want to honor once things dry up, right? It's just sort of big pool funding.
I would say I want this committee focused on making sure we get the structure and the system right, and
Yes.
our colleagues or at large are going to have all kinds of ideas about if we have
Very
a
good point.
couple or $1 million to spend but a couple or a few million dollars to spend annually is not, it's just not gonna, quote unquote, move the needle
Yeah.
on any of our major challenges that we have in Vermont.
What the chair said.
Just want to be careful about us getting into, thinking about spending money in this committee.
No, that's what I'm trying to say. I was like, this isn't enough to like pick a project. Like, this is not gonna fund a special fund. Yes, I think is ultimately what I was trying to say. Is
Yeah.
my great spreadsheet on a Friday.
Oh, no, you got it. You got it.
Their ears were buzzing next door.
Are you kidding me? They've been buzzing on me over this for a while. That's not new to.
Representative Morgan and then Representative Waters.
I know you're trying to wrap it up, but just real quick, I'll throw out there, I think we've lightly said it, but sounds to me, because I don't hear massive consensus either way, that maybe, and I know we talked a moment ago that I think I'm headed, a public hearing, I think would be a very reasonable thing. I think they just put on the table to really seriously for us to consider. That might speak volumes to us. And I'm not saying I'm really one place or the other yet. And I see good, I see bad. Like we heard.
No, very much so. Absolutely.
And so I'm certainly not here to sabotage in either direction, but I think that might have some value.
And that's always the case when we have these like policy conversations in the legislature about vice.
Yeah, because one of the things you hear, I'm sure those who've been doing this a while, like I have in many different arenas, whether it's on the local level or at this level, you always get the, under the cloak of darkness, you did the following. How dare you? What were you thinking? And we all have heard it, you know what I mean? So you.
This has been a pretty public conversation.
Oh, no. I'm just saying,
It's like I've been personally on this since like January.
Yeah, no, I'm not saying we've been.
It's a perception, yes.
Well, not in this arena, but I've had it said to me, what did you guys do? Do that one under the cloak of darkness and never told us you were doing that? I'm going, well, a lot of stuff gets done here. If you're not aware of it, you aren't paying attention, that you never hear about it.
That's fair. I think.
Or if you have, yeah.
2 o'clock in the afternoon.
So anyway, my point 02. So.
I think Lucy had, or Representative Boyden had her hand up before I did. Sure, just a quick thing. I don't know how candid they would be, but I think it would be of some value. Are we the 35th state who's going to do this? Or there are 35 states that have already done it?
I mean, there's like, last number I saw, because it's constantly evolving, like Massachusetts is like up and running like as of like a couple of weeks ago, I believe.
Okay.
So it was like 35 that had been either implemented or on the path to implement.
Right.
I think was roughly the last number I heard-ish, right? It's a constantly moving target.
So maybe Massachusetts wouldn't be like a good person to talk to, but I'm wondering if there are some states who have had a similar model that we're looking at who have been doing it for a while. If their input, if we could have them give some testimony, I'm not sure they'd be like, this is a disaster, but maybe they would say, these are some challenges that we're facing or some things we're trying to improve. And I think.
So Massachusetts actually delayed their start because they dug back into the prevention and prevention, treatment and recovery pieces deeper.
Because they anticipated it wasn't going to be adequate or?
Yeah, more or less, because like their original version, and I'm speaking very like high level here, I think they saw some of the mistakes, like I said, that other states had made. So instead of just like, hitting this target date that was earlier on in last year's calendar, they actually pushed it out to go back, open it back up and add more mechanisms.
It would be useful to hear from somebody and be able to ask them questions about what is worked and not worked.
Yeah, I think I said this earlier, but I'm really interested to hear from somebody from Colorado.
Yeah.
The experience of like rolling it out and then being like, wow, we have a lot of stuff we want to change.
Yeah.
Field trip.
A field trip to Colorado.
Sure.
Speaking of appropriations.
So it's 2 o'clock.
And oh, yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Representative Boyden, I want to apologize. You are in the toughest spot because you're like right in my 90-degree peripheral, so my apologies. Go
That's
ahead.
okay. Just as we plan future conversations, I would really like to hear about what the market might look like if we exclude college sports.
Okay.
I think it makes the market a little more attractive, especially for younger people and those who are more vulnerable to abuse this platform. yeah, I'm just hearing about other states who either have excluded college sports and then also haven't.
To that point, I'd like to hear if there's correlation between particular sports or, not just college versus pro,
Yeah.
but like abuse and problem gambling between, football, baseball, car racing, MMA, whatever. If there's a particular outlier or if they're all kind of.
So one of the things I want to put out there to think about as we're getting some answers to those questions. So we will get some testimony on what should be in and what should be out. But the thing that I keep coming back to whenever I think about sort of cleaving out some piece of the market and saying, we're not going to do that. We're going to choose some from column A and some from column B, and then we're not going to do this thing that we find objectionable. The challenge that we run into is if that's the market that's most associated with problem gambling, for instance, then isn't that the one we most want to bring into the legal system so that we can reduce the harm and potentially engage people differently? So that's the push and the pull that we run into, I think.
To be clear,
We'll hear more about that from people who know more than me.
And then it's like, so what are you then keeping in the dark market as opposed to understanding what's going on?
to be clear, I'm not suggesting we carve it out or leave it off, but maybe that requires a different tack. Or additional resources devoted to resolving the problem gambling aspect.
Mm-hmm.
Like maybe we need to have the 2-hour timer on some type events, or a 1-hour timer on others, or a 6-hour timer on, I don't know, chess games.
So, any last thoughts on this before we park it for the weekend? And, all right.
Uncle.
This was exactly the kind of conversation that a thoughtful, well-functioning committee that's heard a little testimony on a big, hairy subject should be doing. So I really appreciate all of your hard work this week. Thank you very much. We'll be back next week with testimony on a variety of things. And I wanted to say one more thing. Oh, National Guard, just a quick update. I had talked to Sergeant at Arms and the Chief of Staff about trying to coordinate a 4:00 in the afternoon four-part time block in the Pavilion Auditorium. I think we've narrowed it down to a couple of windows, but I'm working on that and should be able to throw some dates to folks over at the Vermont National Guard to pick 4, and then we'll be able to get legislators going to those. So I didn't forget about that. I just wanted to let them.
We do have the 101's going to happen again on the 14th for anybody who wants to pop in on that with us at 8 o'clock, 8 a.m.
Yeah, 8 a.m.
8 a.m.
I love that.
Valentine's Day.
My brain work.
08.
Yeah.
It's military.
You go
0800.
You go date month years.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like the rest of the world.
Today's 3 Feb 2023.
Can we test that? Can we do that?
Pretty soon we're
All right.
doing metric.
So,